Welcome to Sex Talk Radio, a podcast that explores sex, kink, and intimacy through candid conversations with sex workers, researchers, and voices shaping the conversations on sexuality. This episode is brought to you by Testy, a sexual health company I founded launching early 2026, which will revolutionize same-day walk-in STI testing. Head to testy.co to get on the waitlist and get a discount on your first panel.
It showed me how much I had internalized so much stigma about HIV and AIDS. I didn't understand how the virus was transmitted. I didn't understand what it was like living with HIV. I didn't understand that, if somebody was on PrEP, that there was no risk of them contracting HIV. Same if somebody was on effective antiretroviral treatment, their viral load is undetectable. There's no risk of them transmitting it.
Dane Stewart, welcome to Sex Talk Radio.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to be chatting with you.
Feels like a long time coming. I feel like we were connected like over 6 months ago.
Yeah. Quite some time.
I'm excited to jump in. So you're the host of Resurrection podcast, and you can tell us a little bit about that in a sec. I went to find you this morning, and a lot of Bible podcasts popped up. Have you gotten that before?
I have, and it was a little bit intentional when I named the show Resurrection. I wanted, when people went to search for like Christ-related content on the podcast apps, that a kinky gay history podcast would appear in their feeds.
Perfect. Yeah, I think I had to start putting your name in it, and then it ranked. So, I would love to know. Tell me a little bit about the podcast first, then we can jump into a bit about you and your background.
Yeah, Resurrection is a show about individuals whose lives have been cut short or impacted by HIV and AIDS. So we've got 2 seasons out now. The first season just focuses on one man's story. It's 8 episodes about this little-known bisexual playwright named Daryl Allen. He wrote a ton in the 70s and 80s, but died from AIDS-related complications in 1991 before he had the chance to get any of his work produced or published professionally.
Wow.
But then I met one of his ex-boyfriends at this leather bar in Montreal 25 years later, and he learned I was a playwright.
Shit.
Yeah, it's a kind of a crazy rabbit hole story.
Yeah.
But he learned that I was a playwright, and he offered me one of Daryl's pet projects, the script that he had spent like a decade working on.
Whoa.
Gave it to me. I took it home. I read it. It was all about Daryl's time being deployed with the U.S. Air Force during the Vietnam War.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Was it erotic? His time over there?
Well, so there's a gay love story embedded in the script.
Oh.
And that's the part that drew me to him. I wanted to learn everything I could about Daryl. And so I went back to my friend, Dan, and said, what else can you share with me? And he said, well, we were in this long distance relationship for years. And throughout it all, Daryl wrote me all of these love letters all the time.
Wow.
And he gave me this cache of hundreds of pages of these handwritten love letters that the two of them wrote back and forth.
People used to write love letters.
They used to write love letters. Phone call used to cost so much between them because Dan was in Canada and Daryl was in the US, that it was this special little event that they did on like Sunday nights.
Yeah.
Like Daryl would call and they'd get to have their weekly phone call. And there is something so special about the limited communication that they had then versus just how...
Well, it makes it more special. It makes that time more sacred and...
Yeah. And it makes you value it versus like now I can just go on Scruff or Grindr or Sniffies and be messaging erotically with 200 people.
Yeah. I actually just did a full cutoff, like full stop with all of the apps because I realized how it was impacting my ability to like be present and socialize even non-romantically. It's been really weird, which, we can talk about later, but it's been strange.
I think a lot of my friends go through the same thing, and me too. Like I go through periods where I'm on and I'm off with the apps. And I mean, honestly, right now, because I just flew into New York for 5 days, I was like,
America.
Gotta log on. And there's also just something special being in a new gay city where you log on and people are like, fresh.
Oh, you're only here for the weekend?
Haven't seen you before.
However, as a local, it can suck when you start talking to someone and they're like, I'm here for 24 hours. And you're like, okay, like, I guess. I don't know. It's just...
Yeah.
It depends what you're looking for. But when I've been in phases where I'm not looking for a one night stand and I talk to someone and they're here for a day,
No, absolutely. I was in like going on dates mode during Pride in Montreal, and there's all these people in from out of town. And I'm like, I don't want to go on a date with you. Like,
it's a lot of emotional labor to go on dates. Okay, so podcast season 1. Then what?
Yes. So the first season is all about Daryl Allen. It's this rabbit hole. We use the letters to piece together his entire life. The second season of the podcast, it's focused on the early years of the AIDS crisis, largely in the United States. And a lot of it is about New York. Like a lot of the action takes place right around the area where we're recording this. And the way that I told that story is each episode focuses on a different person, but all of the people are linked, kind of like a 6 degrees of separation. So you meet the person in the next episode and the previous episode.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And we follow some lesser known characters from like AIDS history, and then some people who are a bit better known, like Larry Kramer, who wrote the Normal Heart, like famous movie play about AIDS history. Yeah, that's the second season. It's you get to learn all about the invention of safe sex.
Perfect. I'm really excited to get into the nerdy part about that.
It's a lot more historical. We also do like 2 episodes about Ronald Reagan, who, if you, I feel like in my head, I always was like, I hate Ronald Reagan and I don't know why.
That was my, that was my reaction.
And if you feel that way, go listen to those 2 episodes and then you'll know why. But I think the reason that people hate him and they don't understand why is because the thing that was the most evil about what he did is that he didn't do anything. And so it becomes a bit challenging during the AIDS crisis. He just sort of ignored this crisis and let tens of thousands of people grow ill and die. And that, I think, is very insidious, but can feel a bit hard to pin, like, you did this specific action.
It was him not doing it. It was the inaction.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this will probably tie into some of your younger years, but what inspired you to create the podcast?
A few things inspired me to create the podcast. First and foremost, I'm a storyteller, and I've always been interested in queer stories and stories of queerness that are lesser known. So things from history that haven't been reported on. And often the way that I do my research is through oral history interviews. So it's things that you might not be able to find on the internet, that if you type into a large language model, it's not going to be able to tell you these facts because they're in people's heads.
Right.
And I find that so valuable to then find these people, especially queer elders, sit down, record their life stories and figure out what from those stories are worth sharing, worth preserving for our generation and future generations. So that's always been a passion of mine. And then when I was in university doing my master's degree, I took this course on HIV and AIDS. And a whole course on it.
Oh, Canada.
Yeah. Everybody come to Canada, please. And this course, it showed me how much I had internalized so much stigma about HIV and AIDS. I didn't understand how the virus was transmitted. I didn't understand what it was like living with HIV. I didn't understand that, if somebody was on PrEP, that there was no risk of them contracting HIV. Same if somebody was on effective antiretroviral treatment, their viral load is undetectable. There's no risk of them transmitting it.
Was that about 10 years ago? Or I'm not sure how old you are. Okay. Yeah. And I do feel like that was a little bit before PrEP was like a word that people like, maybe?
I think it was right around the time. I think PrEP was approved in the US in 2012, I want to say. And this would have been about 2 or 3 years later. But it was still something that was...
I didn't hear about it. I'm mostly straight, but like I didn't hear about it until much like the last few years is when I feel like it became more common knowledge, or like I was seeing educational posts about it on sex ed accounts, like that kind of thing.
Yeah, for me as well, it was a learning experience. And I had this moment while I was taking this course, and I'm going to maybe overshare a little bit here.
Go for it.
But I went out to a gay bar and I was having a couple beers and started chatting with this guy. And he took me back to his place and we were going to have sex. And before we started having sex, he disclosed to me that he was HIV positive. Mm-hmm. And when he disclosed that to me, I felt this like feeling well up inside of me, like fear mixed with like a revulsion. And I admit that because it was an honest, authentic feeling that I had in the moment.
Sure.
Because I was taking this course, I had this intellectual knowledge where I was like, oh, I know that there's no risk. Why do I have this feeling inside of me?
Yeah.
And, we ended up hooking up and it was really lovely, but I wanted to interrogate where that feeling came from and understand what it takes to unlearn these stigmas that we've developed in our lifetimes. And so a big part of resurrection is helping other people to engage with these stigmas and to understand that it's okay to feel the feelings that we've been brought up to feel, but sometimes you are capable of learning how to undo that.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I appreciate your honesty there, because it's more about like investigating that experience. I had a similar experience when I was in college with somebody that had genital herpes, and I really didn't know how to navigate it. I didn't have the knowledge or the communication tools. And I don't love how I handled the situation. Like at that time, I didn't feel comfortable engaging with them sexually, but I've learned a lot since then, and I think it's important for me to have learned from that experience.
Yeah, and I think that this is something that's so crucial in our current day and age, understanding that you can change, you can grow, and you can behave one way when you're younger and educate yourself, learn or unlearn, and behave differently later on.
And I feel like with HIV, and we'll get into this, it's like what I grew up seeing was footage from decades ago of people dying and very, very ill. And it seems like, I mean, fear sells better than education. Fear sells better than anything. So it makes sense that that's where somebody's mind is going to go to, rather than, oh, I just read this article about PrEP and its efficacy and, that kind of thing. So it's like, I feel like we have these kind of horror stories that were very real at the time, but it's like it can be a visceral reaction for some people.
Absolutely. And for many years, and I think still in certain communities, AIDS and HIV, they were perceived as a death sentence, right?
Yeah.
Like it's a fatal illness. But even at the time, there are people who were diagnosed very early in the epidemic who ended up surviving up until the advent of antiretroviral drugs. So it's
definitely helpful to know. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's there is a complex history there, but I think for me, and this relates back to why I started Resurrection, I was also curious about how our communities, especially queer communities, communities of kinksters, of sex workers, of anyone who lives their sexual life a little bit outside the norm, how we arrived at this space in the 2010s that was so welcoming and was so accepting and so celebratory of difference. And I think diving into the history and the history of the AIDS movement and the way that queer people were forced to tackle this crisis head on and create materials to educate others and really fight against this tide of like Christian morality that was trying to oppress sexuality, and how we really owe like our contemporary sexual climate to these individuals, many of whom who are unfortunately no longer with us.
Yeah. So I'd love to talk a little bit about when the virus first came to be and how it was perceived. And I know we talked about it on our prep call about how people were becoming ill with this or contracting it much before it was on the TV and kind of the initial phase. It's a bit more of diving into season 2.
Absolutely. But this is the meaty history that I love so much.
Same.
So HIV is typically understood to have first been reported in the US in an article that came out in the New York Times in July 3rd of 1981 called Rare Cancer Seen in 41 Homosexuals.
Jesus Christ.
It gives you a bit of a understanding of what's going to happen.
I was looking through my notes and it was like the gay cancer, like it's so extreme.
And so it was initially called gay cancer for a few months, and then it was renamed GRID, not much better. It stood for gay related immune deficiency.
So if you're related to being gay, it's just like,
and
so aggressive.
From a scientific perspective, some of that makes sense. Like most of the clusters where these AIDS-related illnesses were being observed were populations of men who had sex with men.
Which sounds derogatory.
Yes. But after a year or so, the epidemic started expanding. Cases were discovered in other populations. It didn't get any less derogatory, but they started referring to communities of the 4 H's, which was homosexuals, Haitians, hemophiliacs, and heroin users. Were the 4 populations that were seeing a lot of cases. And at that point, they renamed the condition to AIDS, acquired immune deficiency syndrome. And that was in, late, I think 1982, maybe early 1983. But worth noting, the virus, HIV, was not discovered and publicly identified until 1984. So that's 3 years after
Oof.
illness started happening. So people had no idea what was going on in those first 3 years. There were different
Wow.
theories and hypotheses as to what was causing this illness. And some
Terrifying.
people, yeah, it's absolutely terrifying. Think about going through COVID and how much we were all desperate for information that was accurate, and was explaining what was happening. Imagine if we'd gone through 3 years, not even understanding what was going on.
And we were refraining from sex, potentially. And we were afraid that we were going to get really, really sick.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people during the COVID pandemic had to grapple with these questions of, what do I need to be happy in my life to make it through this period? And lots of people bent maybe government rules in order to have relationships.
Right. Similarly, there were, people made compromises to have intimacy and connection.
Yeah. And I think we saw that parallel what happened in the 1980s. But I do want to come back to your question about when the virus originated, because, as I said, it was first reported in 1981. But what many people didn't realize at the time is that it had already been circulating, HIV, in the US for about a decade before that. So it takes about 8 to 10 years for an HIV infection, and the initial infection, to progress to what we understand as AIDS. And they didn't know that there was this 8 to 10 year incubation period in 1981.
Right.
So this means that the virus initially started circulating in the early 1970s.
And so the people that were dying in the early 80s had been infected.
Tens of thousands of people had already been infected at that time.
And have people already potentially been dying prior to 81 as well?
There are. You can go look back in historical reports and see evidence that, yes, people were getting sick and people were dying from AIDS-related illness before it started being reported on.
Were they often categorized as the other illness that came about from the... I'm not the scientist here.
And I think that's an important thing for people to understand. HIV is the viral agent. You can be infected with HIV, at which point you become seropositive or HIV positive. But AIDS is a collection of symptoms. When somebody is deemed to have acquired immune deficiency syndrome, AIDS, there's two ways that it can be diagnosed. One is your T cells, your C4 cells, fall below a certain number. Or the other way to diagnose is that you are diagnosed with one or more opportunistic infections, or OIs. And they're about...
Much more eloquent way.
There are like 25, 26 OIs that are common among people once they progress to the AIDS stage of the illness.
So the cause of death records and stuff is probably off, because it's...
Absolutely.
Yeah, they died of this disease or this thing.
They could have died of a cancer. They could have died of a wasting syndrome or of a brutal pneumonia. So there are instances of that.
Pneumonia is one of the top ones, right? Or
it's
a common.
In the 80s, it was the most common cause of death among people with AIDS. It was a pneumonia called PCP, or pneumocystis carinii pneumonia. And we cover a whole story about this in the podcast, but it's one of the most upsetting public health pieces of the history in the US surrounding PCP, this pneumonia, because there was a drug, a very cheap drug called Bactrim. And there was a generic version of it that was available that a person could purchase. And I believe the full course of that treatment would cost $7 a year in 1981. And you could take it prophylactically. So like PrEP, you take it before you get the infection. And it prevents you from getting that infection. And it was largely safe and very effective. And many doctors had read about this in the 1970s because it was used in other immune compromised patients, specifically people with leukemia.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so
that could have saved lives from people that were sick with pneumonia related to...
It absolutely
AIDS.
Could have. And it did. In some cases, physicians who were working with the community would prescribe Bactrim or its generic counterpart off-label to their patients. And you saw in those populations that they had radically reduced
Wow.
rates of PCP infection and death. And many of these physicians, as well as AIDS activists throughout the 1980s, pushed the government to issue guidance, temporary guidance that physicians could prescribe this, or to conduct the research that was needed to
Right.
issue
They
official
were onto something.
guidelines.
Like it was working.
Yeah, you have AIDS activists who met with Tony Fauci, the same Tony Fauci.
Oh, yes. We'll talk about Fauci a bit. Did not realize how involved he was a few decades ago.
Yeah, the same.
I just
Tony
know him
Fauci.
from COVID Fauci.
COVID Fauci was one of, if not the most powerful person in the U.S. when it came to navigating
what a
the AIDS
trip.
crisis.
That feels like 15 fucking years ago, doesn't it?
Like
So
nothing.
long ago.
Everything is the same.
Right.
I'm just, you look at everything that's happening in U.S. politics now, and then you look at like what was happening in the 1980s, and you're like, why are all the same people? Why is Nancy Pelosi still here? Like,
why are we all still chugging along? Where do you live, by the way? I don't know if we said that at the beginning.
I live in Montreal.
Okay.
I'm Canadian.
All right. Just for context.
Yeah.
In case.
Sorry to all of the Americans, but get your ass up to Canada.
We're trying. We're free speeching as long as we can down here.
Dear God.
Anyways.
Yeah. Hopefully by the time you're able to publish this episode, it's still legal to do
I
so.
know. Okay, so Fauci. Well, let's talk about him in a bit. Were we going somewhere else?
Yeah, well, I have one other. I can talk a little bit more about the advent of HIV, the introduction of HIV to populations in the U.S. Let me talk a bit more about the introduction of HIV to the populations in the U.S.
Yeah.
What we understand now happened is in likely the 1930s in Kinshasa, near Kinshasa, which is modern day Democratic Republic of Congo.
Okay.
Hunters were infected with HIV, which jumped from chimpanzees.
Whoa.
And either they would have eaten a chimpanzee and been infected that way, or, they might have had an open wound and a chimp had an open wound in the blood.
Fascinating.
So the virus started spreading in what we now know, I'm just going to say the Democratic Republic of Congo. And it spread there unchecked for a couple of decades. And you can look at records and you see that there were deaths that started a couple of decades later. And an unfortunate historic event happened in the 1960s where the UN decided to deploy a bunch of Haitians, people from Haiti, to work in Kinshasa. So they brought all of these Haitian workers over.
The U.S.? Oh, no, the
UN. The UN, the United Nations.
Yeah.
Deployed these workers from Haiti. These workers came to Kinshasa. A lot of them contracted HIV and then took it back to Haiti.
Okay.
And then from Haiti, the virus jumped to the U.S., possibly through, sex tourism. There were a lot of gay men who would travel to Haiti to engage in sex tourism at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then jumped over to the U.S. in the early 1970s.
Okay.
And there's scientific proof of this in the late 1970s, I believe it was 77, scientists conducted a study on, I think it was on hepatitis C, maybe hepatitis B, but they collected a whole bunch of blood samples, thousands of blood samples from people in San Francisco and New York City. And these blood samples were saved for decades and retested in 2016.
Holy shit.
And they retested these samples for HIV in 2016, and they found that 7% of the samples from New York and 4% of the samples from San Francisco were HIV positive, and those samples were collected in 1977, which just goes to show that, the virus had spread pretty far and wide even before it started recognized by the community.
Were those samples from men only?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, either way, that's a lot. A lot of people actively having the virus.
Yeah, it's just sometimes the epidemiological properties of a virus, it's just so insidious and sad.
It happens
just
so
invisible
fast.
For 10 years.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, even, you're kind of bringing me back to some visceral memories of just COVID and how scary that was. And it's, okay, well, it is here, but it hasn't made it to us yet, but it's moving fast. And it's is it going to kill you? That was fucking scary.
And the same thing with COVID where you're oh, you're infectious. You can be infectious and spreading this for a few days before you show any symptoms. Mm-hmm. And that's just a few days before you show symptoms.
I think what's so challenging about that time period was how homophobic people were. And so not only were people getting sick, but they were we're able to pinpoint it to gay people and gay men.
Yeah, well, people love a scapegoat, right? And they especially love a scapegoat if it's a marginalized community.
Yes.
And we see this to this very day.
Oh, 1,000%.
Not to get too political, but to me, and having engaged in this history, I always look at when politicians are speaking about a marginalized group, I ask myself, do I personally know someone from this marginalized group? Have I had dinner with, have I had dinner with a trans person? Do I understand their lived experience? If I don't, and a politician is trying to make me hate this person or be suspicious of this person, I flip that around and become suspicious of the politician. I feel like there's a lot of, identity-based horizontal violence that politicians try to inscribe upon us to distract us from building coalitions and becoming class conscious and fighting back, which is one of the things that had to happen in the 1980s to
politicians were not advocating for them.
No. So, and it's honestly fucked. Can I say fucked?
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Please. Sex Talk Radio. Sex. Yeah. Curse words. Go for it.
It's fucked the political situation they were dealing with in the 1980s. You had Ronald Reagan essentially being sworn in at the same time that the first cases of AIDS were being identified in the U.S. Ronald Reagan, a notoriously right-wing president who won his presidency through the backing of the Moral Majority, a Christian evangelical movement that united the Christian right behind him in a voting bloc for kind of the first time in history, and were pressuring him to enact policy that supported Christian family values. So he had no...
Sounds so familiar, unfortunately, in 2025.
Yes. Well, and it gets scary with Reagan because he won in his second term. Reagan won in a huge landslide, I think the biggest landslide that has ever happened in U.S. politics. And that was in 1984. We were then getting to the middle of the AIDS
deep
crisis.
In the crisis.
Really deep. And he had no political reason for engaging with this marginalized community because they were not the people who voted him in.
And what would he gain from
it? What would he gain politically? So Reagan was sworn in 1981. Take a guess as to when he first mentioned AIDS.
Maybe on his next political campaign trail as a negative thing?
Well,
I don't know.
So he brought it up. He mentioned AIDS publicly in 1985. 4 years, thousands of deaths after that virus emerged. Ronald Reagan mentioned it for the first time.
And who did he run against? Do you know?
In 1980, he ran against Jimmy Carter.
Okay.
And in 1994, he ran against Walter Mondale, I believe.
Never heard that name, but heard the first one. I mean, I just imagine how many people's lives would have been saved, if it had potentially been a Democratic candidate. It's awful.
But then you see that he had the support, a huge support of the American public. So, it's deeply upsetting. And in the interim, he had... people were asking questions about AIDS in the early 1980s.
For sure, during press briefings.
And he had a press secretary who would openly make jokes when reporters asked about AIDS. You can look them up. There are recordings of him. A reporter would ask about AIDS and he would turn it back on the reporter and say oh, well, I don't have it. Do you have it? Just make these derogatory jokes while people were dying in absolutely horrific ways without access to, the care that they needed to get them through their end of life, without access to, life-saving medications that could have been brought to market earlier if research dollars had been poured into it. It's an incredibly dark mark on the history of this country.
Well, I mean, I think it's why it's such an important conversation. Is I didn't know much about it, and I still don't. And I think it's really important, and it also translates into modern day sexual health and how to take care of yourself now. And I assume, similar to COVID, were there fears from medical professionals when this was first happening of being in the same room with somebody or touching someone, or were people, because of the homophobia at the time, extra dismissive in the medical field about this?
It obviously depended on the healthcare professional with whom someone was engaging, but there are horrible stories, particularly from the early years of the epidemic, where healthcare professionals refused to be in the same room with patients, with people with HIV. They refused to touch them. They would leave people on gurneys out in the hallway, or they would refuse to go into their room and leave a tray of food outside their room.
Yeah.
Truly horrific treatment. You have, police officers beating gay people during demonstrations while wearing rubber gloves because they were afraid that they would contract HIV just by being in that close proximity to people, which just belies this total lack of understanding and knowledge of the virus and how it was transmitted.
Yeah.
And of course, like I said, the virus was only confirmed publicly in the US in 1984. So there was a lot of
years
confusion.
of confusion.
Yeah. Yeah, and a lot of time for misinformation to bubble up for the gay community.
Everyone's favorite, misinformation.
It's shocking, the parallels.
Yeah,
shocking.
Truly.
Yeah.
I'm assuming this also put a lot of people, and I don't know if this tied into any of your stories, that were forced to come out too.
Yeah, well, you had people who were dying. They had no choice but to come out. And I can bring this back to our good friend Ronald Reagan here, because the time that he first mentioned HIV publicly, it was after the death of an actor, Rock Hudson, a very famous Hollywood actor. And Ronald Reagan, of course, came from Hollywood. He was an actor as well. So he and Rock Hudson knew each other. And Rock Hudson he was at a party at the White House the year prior. And Nancy Reagan, the first lady, looked at Rock and saw that he had like a lesion on his face and told him, "Oh, you should get that checked out." And that lesion turned out to be Kaposi sarcoma, one of the opportunistic infections that impacts people with AIDS. Rock Hudson had been in the closet and had been secretly having relationships with men, had contracted HIV, and ended up dying very publicly in 1985.
Oof, got chills.
And a lot of gay people at the time celebrated his death because it brought public attention to this illness that no one had cared about. And obviously that's complicated. I don't think people were celebrating the fact that someone had died, but
celebrating the public eye finally.
Yes.
I mean, that's such a parallel with current media. Like it has to be something morbid and fucked up for people to care. Like it's
something morbid and fucked up and celebrity to be wrapped up.
Yeah. Yep. 1000%.
Yeah. So Rock Hudson's death, a lot of people look at it as kind of the turning point in the epidemic where people started taking it seriously.
Yeah.
But it moves.
That was the catalyst for Ronald Reagan to speak about it?
Yeah.
Was talking about Rock
It was, I think, a couple of weeks after that.
Reminds me so much of Trump, like wanting to talk about someone he knows. Like,
yes. Yeah. I will say Ronald Reagan he was a bit more measured in his
Sure. Was he talking about him as like a friend, or was it homophobic?
I can't recall the exact communication when he gave that mention publicly.
But that like publicly brought light to this exists. It's real.
Yeah. But notably, Reagan didn't create the Presidential Commission on HIV until 1987. So it was another.
Oh my God.
Like in his almost last year of his last term. So kind of crazy.
Yeah. Do you want to speak about Fauci a little bit and what was going on behind the scenes with trials and medication and what the treatment looked like?
Yeah. So Tony Fauci, this is the same Tony Fauci who led the U.S. response to COVID-19.
Insert photo of.
Everybody has a photo of him deeply imprinted on our brains.
I got like thirst trap montages during COVID from him. I got all sorts of
thirst traps. Oh my God, I can't.
We were really bored at home. Okay, we were bored in the house.
Thank God we didn't have like AI at that point.
God. Can you imagine if we had AI during COVID?
AI Fauci thirst trap porn.
Yes.
What I said. And now let me tell you about history.
Okay. That's what we're here for.
So Fauci, he was a very young go-getter physician, worked at the
epidemiologist.
All of his research was into disease progression, that sort of thing. And he became the head of NIAID, which is one of the institutes at the National Institute of Health. I believe it's in 1984 that he became the head of NIAID. That's the National Institute of Allergies and Infectious Diseases. And he was the youngest person ever appointed to that role. And he made the person who appointed him give him special permission while he was the head of NIAID that he would still be able to continue his research because he had started researching this illness that was killing primarily gay men in the early 1980s. And he until it was solved, he wanted to continue that practice. And he saw patients, they had a clinical ward at the NIH. So he was literally engaging with treating people
Yes.
with AIDS throughout the whole crisis. So getting that like firsthand lived experience. So he did a lot of good.
Yes.
And he advocated for increased funding. He like really took it to the Reagan administration and convinced them to increase the funding substantially. In doing so, he kind of accidentally made himself one of the most powerful people in the epidemic, because that funding, it could have gone to some different institutes at the NIH. Like it could have gone to the National Cancer Institute, because a lot of the opportunistic infections were cancer-related infections. But Fauci convinced them, no, give that money to me. And so he became sort of the leader of the effort to fight AIDS. And so while he did do many good things, there is some room for criticism of his actions. Fauci became very obsessed with finding a sort of cure-all for this virus. The idea being, if you can stop the virus, you win the war. And that's kind of where we're at.
Stop the virus from progressing.
Stop the virus from progressing once a person is infected with it, or eradicate it from their system, or develop a vaccine so that a person cannot get the virus in the first place. If you just stop it at the virus, you win the war. But remember, at the time, people were dying from these opportunistic infections.
Right.
So you have like 26,
complicated.
26 brutal infections that people are suffering from, that where you could dedicate research and funding to figure out how to treat and prevent those
how they're
infections.
all related. Yeah, how they're
all related. But there's limited funding. So where do you prioritize those dollars to go? And Fauci chose, for the vast majority of the funding, to go towards researching how to stop the virus. So we were talking previously about this brutal pneumonia, the number one killer of people with AIDS in the 1980s. Fauci did not dedicate the funding to research how they could prevent or treat that pneumonia.
Okay.
Despite the fact that there were
it's different than treating. It would be different than treating regular pneumonia.
It would be. I mean, it's pneumonia that specifically impacts people who are immunocompromised.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's different from a regular pneumonia infection. But he could have dedicated money to that, to research this drug that did exist, that was already being used in other immunocompromised
created kind of a
groups.
bottleneck, it seems like.
Yeah. And instead, he really focused his research on one drug, AZT, which, if you, like me, are a fan of the musical Rent, you have heard of AZT before, because in the musical Rent, people's like watches go off and they all like have to take their like AZT break to take their AZT.
Oh my gosh.
It's a drug called azithromycin, and it was the first drug that was approved to treat people living with HIV and AIDS. It's an antiretroviral. It would eventually become part of the combination therapy that was used to treat.
He was on the right track.
He was sort of on the right track, but there's so many issues with AZT.
Okay.
It is highly toxic. So some people couldn't tolerate it. Some people couldn't tolerate it for very long.
And this is something that they would have to be on indefinitely, kind of like
PrEP, in theory. This is what Fauci was researching in the late 80s. He was trying, how much AZT do we give to a person? At what point in disease progression do we give it to the person? Can we like give them like take breaks from it and bring it back? Because what they learned is that a body can adapt, the virus rather can adapt to AZT. If it's just AZT because it only targets viral replication at one point in the process, the virus will learn and it will adapt to that.
Wow.
So it can help people for a few months on its own if they can tolerate the toxicity, but then they will become susceptible to AIDS once again, and they often are weaker because they've been taking this very toxic drug. So there's a whole vast piece of this history around AZT, where it then became, there were all these conspiracy theories that started
familiar with medications
and people started thinking, oh, well, it's not like HIV, the virus isn't even real. It's AZT that's causing this illness. And that like,
oh Lord.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that was a mindset, that was a conspiracy theory that went worldwide for years and years. In the early 2000s,
that HIV is not real, that this medication, if you take it, you will get it.
It's a conspiracy theory called HIV denialism.
Wow.
And there was a health minister in South Africa in the early 2000s who adopted this conspiracy theory and put it into policy. And they estimate that 300,000 people in South Africa died because they didn't have access to drug treatments that would have prevented them from.
So AZT was saving lives.
In the early 2000s, we were at a point where we developed combination therapy.
Okay,
so
gotcha.
Yeah, so there were medications that were available and effective at that point.
Okay, Fauci. I'm no longer sure if he deserves the Daddy Fauci title because he. Well, it sounds like he was well intentioned, but maybe got a little hyperfixated.
Well-intentioned, hyperfixated, and when you're in a position of power like that, I think that you open yourself up to criticism. But one of the things I believe as a storyteller is that people are complex. Like everyone is going to make mistakes at some point or another. We have to be allowed to be complex. We have to be allowed to make mistakes. And Fauci is one of these people who, if you read his memoir, which came out last year, and I read it while I was researching this episode, you can see how deeply affected he was by HIV, by AIDS, by caring for these people who were dying.
So a lot of suffering.
You can see how well-meaning he was.
Yeah.
But I think we can still be critical of that hyperfixation he had on AZT. And to demonstrate that, like there was a moment in, I think it was 1987, where he was approached by a group of AIDS activists. One of those men was a man named Michael Callan, who I cover in the podcast. Yeah. Cabaret singer turned slut turned AIDS activist. And he secured a meeting with Fauci in 1987 where he went to Fauci and begged Fauci to issue guidelines for physicians to use this drug, Bactrim, that could prevent PCP infection.
What's PCP?
PCP is the pneumonia that the leading cause of death among people with AIDS in the 1980s. And Callan begged Fauci to issue guidelines, and Fauci said no, he would not, because there was not sufficient data to support it, despite the fact that the same drug was being used in other immunocompromised populations.
Were people going to like black markets, for lack of a better word, to find some of these drugs? I mean, I feel like when you're desperate.
For that drug specifically, physicians were able to prescribe it off-label. So if you had a physician who was well-educated, they could prescribe that to you and monitor it. Yeah. But the issue is that many, many physicians didn't know about it. And so they just weren't prescribing it. And all it would take is a simple communication from NIAID or from the NIH to tell physicians to do that. So
to like give the sign off.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I mean, I feel like doctors also have fear of like their licenses, it's all very like important. So they want to follow the rules.
Well, and in addition to that, Fauci declined to issue those guidelines because there was no data to support it. But he was in charge of the research institute.
Right. He could create the data by doing studies.
And what's so simultaneously devastating and inspiring is that Michael Callan, this activist, when Fauci declined and said there was no data, Callan went back to the community. He teamed up with his doctor, Joe Sonnabend, who ran a clinic for men who had sex with men here in Manhattan.
Oh,
wow. And the two of them teamed up together and formed an organization called the Community Research Initiative, the CRI.
You're like, we'll do it our fucking selves.
They did. And they absolutely did. They got funding from one of the drug companies that was working on sort of a novel formulation of one of these prophylactic drugs for the pneumonia. And this was the first time in history that community-driven research led to FDA approval of a drug use.
Holy shit.
Yeah,
I know a bit about FDA approval. It's not a fucking joke.
No. And yeah, so they ran this drug trial. They got approval from the FDA. But it wasn't until 1989 that they got that drug on the market. And it's worth noting that in the intervening years, Callan tallied it up. I think it was 17,000 more people had died from PCP-related infection in those 2 years, which absolutely could have been prevented. Absolutely could have been prevented if Fauci had issued those guidelines.
For Bactrim? Is that what it was called?
For Bactrim or trimethoprim sulfamethoxazole is the generic brand name version.
Like those were preventing those being taken indefinitely or for a certain amount of time around a pneumonia exposure would?
Indefinitely. You would take it every day.
Okay.
Yeah, you take it every day.
Wow.
As a prophylactic. And Callan and his doctor Sonnabend, their FDA approval, it wasn't even for Bactrim. It was for a less effective drug called aerosolized pentamidine because they had to
You've got a great memory.
I had to learn all
You had to.
jargon. But they had to get funding to do the research, and because
from the drug company.
And Bactrim, because there was already a cheap generic formulation available,
God.
the drug company wasn't going to fund this
I
research.
hate that.
So they got this research funding for a less effective form of
I hate
medication.
that health is literally like capitalist. Like it's terrifying.
Yeah.
It's terrifying. I actually like don't have health insurance right now and I'm having some health issues and I'm like being reminded of like how fucked up our country is. Also why I'll be on my way to Canada.
Yes.
But so it was just this one that was FDA approved. Were people able to prescribe the other ones or not?
They could still prescribe them off label and they were approved a few years later.
Okay.
But it's and aerosolized pentamidine, was pretty effective. But I think it's worth noting once it was approved, the company then jacked up the price of the drugs.
Of course.
Yeah.
I mean, this would have been a terrifying fucking entire decade for men having sex with men.
Decade and a half. It was 1995, late 1995, almost 15 years after that New York Times article, that an effective treatment was developed. And the number of cases and deaths just increased at an exponential rate. So the 90s was the worst period.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And I don't want to generalize too much, but I feel like men who have sex with men are quite sexually active. So like what did sexual health practices look like during the 80s? How did they develop? Were people completely abstaining? And then we could talk about the pamphlet as well.
Absolutely. So it depended on the person, of course.
Yeah.
So coming into the 1980s, the 1970s was a period of great sexual freedom.
We're like free love, drugs, partying.
Free love, partying. You know,
orgies.
We had the gay liberation dovetailed with the sexual revolution to just create a climate of sluttiness.
In the 70s.
Yeah, in the 1970s. And obviously
like
not everybody, like you hear a lot of the discourse that you...
Yeah.
I
don't want to ever generalize, but...
Well, and you can see through some of the work that was created at that time, there's someone we profile on the podcast, Larry Kramer, who listeners might know from the play The Normal Heart, which was turned into a big HBO film 10 years ago. So this very famous playwright, he wrote a book in the late 1970s called Faggots because he was so pissed off at everybody going out and like having all of this kinky sex and being sluts and him not being able to find a boyfriend. And he had this boyfriend and the boyfriend left him to like go be free in New York's sex clubs and bars and everything.
Sounds like he had FOMO.
And so he wrote this book where it was like a thinly veiled narrative about his ex-boyfriend and everyone he knew in New York. Where he just like lambasts everyone for being slutty. So you can see this kind of dichotomy that exists there. A nice romantic bookend to that is that like 10 years later, Larry Kramer and this ex-boyfriend, they got back together and they stayed together until they both died.
Sometimes you have to let your partner go. Sleep around for a couple decades.
Let it happen. So that's the kind of complicated sexual environment into which HIV emerged. And the first couple of years, 1981, there were maybe 200-ish deaths in the US. So not a huge number. That increased to maybe like 600 to 900 in 82. And then by 83, we started seeing deaths in the thousands, and that would increase to like the tens of thousands within a few years. So the first couple years, a lot of people were not that afraid. It seemed like
their behavior wasn't changing necessarily.
Their behavior wasn't changing. And a lot of people believed that being a slut was kind of an ethical obligation to fight the good political fight.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Good soundbite.
And I'm going to forget this writer's name, but there's a writer who referred to sluttiness as like a red badge of courage in a war against a sex-negative society. So you had to go out there and you had to have sex. And that makes sense to a certain point. Yeah. But then you can see it gets really complicated when a new viral agent that they didn't even know was a viral agent is introduced to the community.
Yes. Were people using condoms? Like, what was the sexual health landscape of the 70s?
Condoms were available, but people weren't really using them. There was not much happening in terms of sexual health prevention, at least in communities of men who had sex with men.
Yeah.
And you can see this, there were doctors at the time who specialized in what we call STIs, but they called VD, venereal diseases.
That's right.
And so a lot of gay men at the time you'd have your regular doctor who you went to for most things, and then you'd have your clap doctor. And that's a bit of a derogatory term, but that's what people would say. Your clap doctor, who you go to for your VD.
Can only fathom what those experiences were like, because I started collecting stories on the podcast, which inspired me to build Testy, which were things that providers in the last few years had said to them upon taking their sexual health questionnaire. Yeah. And it's often very sex negative, slut shamey, derogatory. And it can be these small, even micro responses that doctors have when you tell them how many partners you've had or who you have sex with. I can only fucking fathom.
Yeah, well, even me in Montreal, one of the complicated things about the Canadian healthcare system is that it's hard to find a family doctor, because everyone in theory can access healthcare for free, but there's just a strain on the system. So I have this family doctor, but she's not like very well versed in like gay issues. And so I had to explain to her what PrEP was and why I needed it. And she was like, well, how many partners do you like? She got very like a little bit judgmental in the conversation. And I was like, look, like I work in this field, like I know what I need and I know what I want, and I had to advocate for myself in this.
Are there clinics in Canada the same way that there are sexual health clinics here?
There are. Okay. Yeah, there are. Yeah, I go to a like gay health clinic or queer health clinic in Montreal to get my STI testing now. Yes, but jumping back to the landscape of the early 1980s, and
nobody was using condoms.
Nobody was using condoms, and there's one of the stories that we do in the podcast. That is a great way to trace this history. It's about this doctor, Joe Sonnabend. He was a clap doctor based here in New York. He had a clinic where most of the people that he saw were men who had sex with men. They would come in just to get their VD treated. And he noticed in the late 1970s collections of weird symptoms in his patients. He noticed swollen lymph nodes. He noticed people experiencing stomach issues, different like odd symptoms. And he had a background as an immune researcher.
He knew something was going on.
So he knew something was going on. He started he ran some tests. He found some like weird things. He knew something weird was happening. And he's one of the people who pushed for that article to be published in the New York Times in 1981. So he had many patients. Among them was Michael Callan, this musician who I mentioned earlier.
That's who you're here to research.
That's who I'm in New York to research. He's got a bunch of tapes in the LGBT archives at the center here in New York.
Very cool.
So Michael Callan moved to New York to become a singer. He's a musician. He was in his early 20s when he moved here. He just studied in Boston, but he was from a small town in Ohio, Hamilton, Ohio. Moved here, and as much as he was chasing the New York dream, trying to be a musician, he also was chasing sexual liberation, and he became a slut, self-proclaimed slut, absolute slut. He would later say that he estimated he had, somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 sexual partners over his lifetime. So he did really well.
He had a lot of fun in New York.
It's
hard not to.
It's really hard not to, and it's
a erotic city.
It's a fun place. I mean, look, I'm here, and let me just say I'm doing a bit of following in Michael Callan's footsteps while I'm here.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I mean,
doing
I
my best.
New York erotic because, and I think I'm onto something here, but it's like you have such intense like power and finance and like money. Like right now, the UN national thing is going on.
Sorry, you just inspired me. I'm like, can I?
Can I fuck a delegate? I literally talked about this on Instagram yesterday. We're going to take a slight pivot for a moment to talk about our kinks, because I got a little office for Testy that's down by Grand Central. I can't talk today. And I literally show up and I'm not even joking right now, there are thousands of security guards because each president and delegate has their own security team. And it's the National Assembly right now. So like all of the presidents and delegates from around the world are in New York City right now. So maybe you should open Grindr. Maybe you should consider. But I was like, anyways, some of my desires came to light yesterday when I was walking by all of these like delegates and security teams swarming them. Coming back to why I think New York is so kinky and interesting is like you just have a lot of power and money and energy, and it's pent up, and it's like we're gonna be a kinky fucking city. So
hell yeah. Yeah,
went on a tangent there. But
I'm a believer that like power is one of the hottest things to harness in a sexual dynamic.
Same. Absolutely.
Yeah. All relationships have a power dynamic. And Kingsters are just so good at figuring out how to harness that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I love being in touch with it too. Like what I always say is like I can go to the grocery store and see like a couple and I can know who's in charge, like just body language. And I think it's so fun.
Yeah. And it's not me. I'm not in charge. Just for anyone out there listening.
We'll come out for 6 months, but yeah.
God.
All right. Where were we?
So
Power. Oh, Michael Callan came to New York and was a slut.
Yeah, he was a slut. So he had to see Sonnabend, his doctor, every so often to get treated. He had a lot of, different.
Was the doctor queer?
Great question.
Or he was straight?
He never really disclosed what his sexuality was. He was from South Africa originally, lived in London for a time, and then moved to New York City. Mm-hmm. And he did move to New York City partially to be in relationships with men. He had a long-term partner here who was a man, but he also had, children with a woman back in London.
Sure.
So yeah, kind of a.
But he was sex positive about all of this, which I think was really special for the time.
Yeah, and he ran this clinic where he also, because he came from the UK, where they had like publicly funded healthcare, he believed in that, and so he would give people treatment for free if they couldn't afford it.
Wow.
And so for that reason, his clinic was also always packed with people. He would sit with patients for as long as they needed to understand the issues that were happening with them. People had to wait; their appointments were always delayed. The office was always packed. Some people, there's a quote from one of his patients who said, bring a copy of War and Peace. You might get through it while you're in the waiting room.
I mean, I would just, on a nerdy side note, would love to talk to you more about this specific doctor at some point, because I think it could be cool for my testy work.
Absolutely.
It's important history.
Well, and he's involved in the whole sort of revolution that happens for safe sex in the 1980s. And it comes from this moment. Right. Michael Callan went in to see Sonnabend for a regular checkup at one point in 1982. And Sonnabend gets a phone call in the middle of their appointment. He has to leave his office, and this phone call goes really long. So Michael Callan just starts looking around Sonnabend's office, and he sees in his typewriter this article that Sonnabend had been preparing for publication in a scientific journal. And the article outlined Sonnabend's hypothesis of what was causing what we now know as AIDS. And this was before the virus had been discovered. Yeah. Sonnabend, he didn't predict the virus, but he had a different theory that was one of the competing hypotheses called the immune overload model, or the multifactorial model. Sonnabend's theory was that gay men who were having tons and tons of sex, these people who were living this sort of fast-track lifestyle, they were being constantly exposed to different pathogens, to like viruses, bacteria, STIs, all of that. And each of these pathogens would take a little toll on the person's immune system. And over time, the person's immune system would weaken to the point that they became susceptible to these illnesses that we know as the opportunistic
Which also lines
infections.
Up with like the more sex you have, it's kind of sex. It's not sex negative, but you know what I mean.
It's complicated, and
because he obviously wasn't a slut shamey guy, but that hypothesis lines up with like
but it's such a complicated dynamic, because even if I think you want to understand the scientific facts of what's happening. So if this is right, like
true.
You want, you want to understand that. But Mike read this article, and to him, it was like an epiphany. It was like, light bulbs going off.
Yeah.
And when Sonnabend came back into the room, Mike said, you have to publish this, but not in a scientific journal. Mike encouraged Joe to publish it in the New York Native, which was the local gay newspaper here in New York at the time.
There's a gay newspaper.
Yeah.
Oh, fun.
And the gay newspaper became one of the primary sources for information, because the major media outlets weren't really.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So Sonnabend says, no, I'm not going to publish this. I don't have the time for it. But Mike said, I'll do it for you. Like, let me do this. And
is he an illustrator as well? Or
he wasn't.
Were there illustrations in this for some reason?
There must be.
Maybe in the pamphlet. But I don't know.
Yeah, well, and we're not quite to the pamphlet yet. Well, we have to the pamphlet. But so Sonnabend says, sure, you can make this available for publication in the Native, but you should talk to this other patient that I have who's been interested in doing a similar thing. So Sonnabend introduces Callan to another one of his patients, a man named Richard Berkowitz, who becomes a very essential part of this history. And Callan and Berkowitz get together, and they write this article based on Sonnabend's research. And the article, they end up titling, "We Know Who We Are, And the editor of The Native adds a subtitle without telling the two of them.
Oh, no.
2 gay men declare war on promiscuity.
Oh, Jesus.
You can look up the article. It's pretty aggressive.
Okay.
They really do place the blame for the spread of this illness on gay men themselves and on their own behaviors, saying
and it's published in the
it's published in the New York Native. And this is two men in their 20s, in 26, 27, who have like no real credentials, no real history of publication.
Yeah.
And they write things like, we know who we are, we know why we're sick. Our community's out having sex at bathrooms, bathhouses, back rooms, meat racks.
It's like
parks.
using the basis of that article, which is that the more you're exposed to, the more sex you're having. It's like this almost cumulative risk.
And really downloading that responsibility onto the individual. So they are predictably lambasted, critiqued by the community for this article.
By the gay community.
By the gay community. All these people who are out there saying, this, like, our sexual rights are important. The sexual revolution is being set back by articles like this.
Yeah.
There's absolutely critique.
Wow.
Callan becomes depressed. He doesn't want to do this work anymore. He thinks about, stepping back and just living his life outside of activism.
Mm-hmm.
And so they kind of take a little bit of a break. And then this epiphany takes place. And the epiphany, it happens to Richard Berkowitz, Mike's writing partner. Richard Berkowitz was a sex worker. He was an escort. You should look up photos of him. He's so hot.
I'm starting to add more photos to the reels, so I'll input it as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, Richard Berkowitz, really, really hot guy, and incredibly intelligent. And I've spoken with him since.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, he's still living in the area, and he's just like a voraciously intelligent man. So he was a sex worker, and he engaged in a lot of sadomasochistic play. He was a dom, and did a lot of like leather and kink and that sort of thing. And cool. Once he read Sonnabend's hypothesis, he decided to stop having sex, have a period of celibacy so he could give his immune system a chance to recover. But during this period of celibacy, he had one client who absolutely would not leave him alone, would not stop pestering him for a session. And at one point, this man attempts compromise, and he contacts Berkowitz and he says, what if I come over and all that we do is boot worship? We don't do any penetrative sex. It's just a boot worship session. Mm-hmm. And Berkowitz agrees to this. And in the days following that experience, he cannot stop thinking about it. Yeah. And he has this epiphany where he realizes there was no risk associated with that.
Kink isn't always sex, you guys.
No. And he realizes, what if instead of telling people to stop having sex entirely, what if we created a guide to sex that addressed risk? That we use the available scientific information we have about this illness, and we tell people these are the different risk levels associated with different sex acts, and we let people make the decisions for themselves about how much risk they want to take on. Extremely progressive
groundbreaking
thinking.
At the time. I mean, right now it sounds so logical, but that's because he set the precedent.
Yes,
it sounds like
this is like where this idea came from.
Yeah, of safe sex. Safer sex.
So Berkowitz contacts Callan. Callan is still pretty depressed.
Poor guy.
Poor guy. But he agrees. Like, Berkowitz explains this idea, and Callan's like, yeah, hell yeah, let's do it. So the two of them get together.
They're not going to stop having sex.
No
matter fucking what. No matter COVID. No matter an HIV/AIDS epidemic. Like, it's not going to stop.
And this is where I think we could have learned during COVID about how people are going to do the things that they need to do to feel fulfilled.
Yeah.
And instead of telling people to stop cold turkey from doing these things, instead of banning certain behaviors, offer people the tools to make informed decisions about the risk associated with their behaviors. And that's exactly what Callan and Berkowitz ended up doing. They get together, they work with Sonnabend, with their doctor. He reviews everything they write, and they create this groundbreaking pamphlet that they call How to Have Sex in an Epidemic, One Approach. And the pamphlet outlines the different theories for the cause of AIDS. They talk about Sonnabend's theory, the immune overload, the multifactorial model. They also talk about another emerging theory, the single virus theory, which of course would turn out to be true. But with both of these competing theories, a lot of the risk reducing behavior is the same. So they then lay out like the different types of sex acts. So getting fucked in the ass without a condom is like a high risk behavior.
Okay.
Oral sex, a little bit lower risk. And then certain things are no risk at all, cuddling, boot worship.
Right, which people didn't know. Yeah.
And then they also suggest ways that you can introduce things that will reduce your risk. So wearing a condom, for example, while you're having anal sex can greatly reduce your risk of transmission.
Yeah. Wow.
And we know, there are anecdotes that condom use went up substantially in the summer following the publication of this pamphlet. I read in, I think it's David France's book, How to Survive a Plague, where he writes about people starting to refer to condoms as Hudson River whitefish in New York City because condoms they became so popular in New York City that they would float up out of the water in the Hudson River whitefish.
We hadn't got to recycling and proper trash disposal yet.
No, unfortunately. But I do love that. And there you can see a reduction in STI rates because the virus the venereal diseases. Gonorrhea diagnoses dropped significantly in both New York and San Francisco in the year following the publication of this pamphlet.
Wow.
They sent copies of the pamphlet all around the world. They received letters back thanking them from many different countries. And you can see a lot of what they outlined, this sort of harm reduction, what we would today refer to as a harm reduction approach to safer sex, being adopted into sexual education material by organizations all around the world. And you see this to this day, like it's kind of standard now, but you can hypothesize that depending on how you rank it, this sex worker and this self-proclaimed slut invented safe sex and saved millions of lives around the world with their theories and their information. It's like pretty revolutionary.
Wow, it is revolutionary, and just goes to show like the importance of community when you're going against not only politics but also going against the bureaucracy of like FDA approval and these medical processes that take fucking years. Like there wasn't time for that, there wasn't time for people to wait for either medical professionals or the politicians to speak out about this.
Yeah, I mean it's so inspiring that it came from within the community, and then it's just frustrating that it had to come from
1000%.
the community.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
The other thing inspiration that I draw from their story is the fact that these two writers, they publish this article, the first one, We Know Who We Are, where they are starkly critiqued by the community.
Right.
And instead of walking away, they take those criticisms, they listen to them, they learn from them, and they use them to inform a more like human-centered, empathetic approach to risk reduction. And I think that's something we need these days. There's a lot of desire to stop listening to people if they posit a theory or an idea that you disagree with. And I believe people have to be allowed to make mistakes. We're all coming to issues with different levels of knowledge, and you have to be able to have the time to educate yourself.
Definitely.
And change.
So we have a little bit of time left. I would love to talk a little bit about like the protests that occurred, and then also jump forward to now, so where we're at with health and PrEP and being undetectable and all that stuff. But I know that, a lot of the footage that I think of is people protesting to try to get politicians and the government to listen. I'm assuming that was maybe like 83-ish. I don't know. I feel like I'm learning my years now, but.
Well, that's interesting because the ACT UP, the sort of direct action political group that I think we all think of, they had the flashy antics, the flashy graphics and protests and everything.
Yes.
That group was founded in 1987. 6 years.
So it wasn't to get Reagan to do anything about it. This was
it was the tail end of Reagan's second term. But it was to get the ACT UP's one of their first mottos was drugs into bodies. They again wanted more people to have access to. I
recognize that phrase.
Yeah, they wanted people to have access to treatments that were available, even if those treatments were still being studied. They wanted more treatments to be studied. It was just like no one was getting access to drugs. And AZT, this drug that hit the market, when it hit the market, it was the most expensive drug in U.S. history, $10,000 a year for a course of AZT. Absolutely mind-boggling. Meanwhile, people couldn't access this cheap sulfa drug that would have prevented the PCP, which was $7 a year.
So what was ACT UP?
So ACT UP is the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, and it was a direct action advocacy group. It brought together people from within the queer community largely, but then also built coalitions with other communities to mount these different protests. It expanded, and their chapters were born in different cities across the US and across the world. And they pushed for faster drug approvals, more advocacy from the government. They'd staged like political actions. They, at one point, there's a famous ACT UP demonstration where they went to the house of a senator, U.S. Senator Jesse Helms, a very conservative senator who created this legislation where any AIDS funding mandated that the organization receiving the funding could not reference implicitly or explicitly any homosexual lifestyle or behaviors, which makes it pretty hard to adequately educate people about HIV.
Right.
So they went to his house and they unfurled a giant yellow condom over top of his house.
Amazing.
Yeah. So
nonviolent protest.
Yeah.
Got to get creative.
But ACT UP it was a complicated movement. It became very fractured. There's a really great documentary by David France called How to Survive a Plague. It's absolutely fantastic if you haven't seen it.
Is that a book too?
It's also a book.
Okay.
Yeah. So he did the movie and then he put out a book about the same period. And he was like a journalist, like a gay journalist living in New York at the time. So he has like, all the lived experience, all of his reporting, and then just is an absolutely fantastic researcher. Yeah, so he has a great movie about this, but the group became fractured because some of the people in ACT UP and ended up sort of partnering with government organizations and like corporate organizations to try to lend a voice of lived experience to how those organizations were conducting research. And in some ways that was very effective. Like, these queer people essentially made themselves subject matter experts. They learned so much about AIDS, HIV, viral replication, and treatment that they were able to, outspeak some of these people who had been, physicians and researchers and drug developers who'd been working in this space for years, and through that kind of forced their way into the conversation. But then pissed off other people in the organization who thought we shouldn't be partnering up with these people. It's sort of classic political organizing.
One other visual that comes to mind for me when I think about this, and I think I've seen some various posts on social about this, and this was earlier, I think, in the epidemic, when no one was comfortable, or when certain medical professionals weren't comfortable being in the same room or near someone. I believe that a lot of queer women stepped up.
Oh, absolutely.
To help these men. And that was like a really beautiful and interesting bridging of communities.
Yeah, a very important coalition.
Yeah, so
and
beautiful.
Network of empathy. A lot of lesbians, queer women stepped in to help gay men, especially during end of life, for some of these opportunistic infections that would kill people. They were illnesses that were very slow acting. So a person would be painful, and a person would be at home slowly losing their independence, slowly needing more and more support. And the government just didn't offer that. They didn't offer those supports. So people, either your friends or other people from your community, would have to come and help you with, day-to-day tasks.
Hospice care.
A lot of families wouldn't want to see their children, or a lot of families would try to hide the fact that a kid would come back home and try to hide what their kid was dying of when they went back home. Which imagine going back to live with your parents while you're dying, and your parents are so ashamed of you that it's just. I mean, I try to sit in like the fascinating historical stories from the time, because if I sit in the visceral reality of it for too long, it's just, it can be utterly overwhelming. And I also try to respect the fact that many, many people lived through that and carried the weight of that and the survivor's guilt to this
Sure.
day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. So we do have to do a good amount of flashing forward in the next 10 minutes
Absolutely.
on that note. Yeah, take me through the 90s and take me through the shifting of this to where people could I'm not going to speak eloquently about this. I'm going to hand it over to you.
Let me take it away here. Yeah, so we finally had this new drug hit the market in late 1995 called protease inhibitors.
But not until 1995.
Not until 1995. This is late 1995.
People were dying of
People were dying.
AIDS through the early 90s.
Yeah, and those were the worst years. The numbers were increasing exponentially.
Like, and it's when I was like born. Like that was not that. Like that's
and it's interesting.
Fucking crazy.
And I can't be sure about this.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna speculate a little bit.
Mhm.
Like when people of our age, our generation, think about the AIDS crisis, we often think about the 1980s as being this period where it was all happening.
When people were the most sick is like what I think.
Yes.
But it's not true.
And I think it might be that it was so absolutely devastating and people had been pushing for change and progress for so long that there's just this period where people, it's too much. It's too much to handle. And so many people were dying. And obviously action was still happening. Things were still going on. ACT UP was still doing demonstrations. Other groups were emerging.
I did not know that.
But those were the worst years. That was when, tens of thousands of people were dying in the US every year from AIDS-related illness. So absolutely brutal. And there's still, there were no confirmed drug treatments up until late 1995 when we have protease inhibitors hit the market. And protease inhibitors in combination with other drugs created an effective, antiretroviral treatment called combination therapy.
Yeah.
And at that point, historians refer to it as the Lazarus effect. You had all of these people who seemed sort of on death's door, like Lazarus in the Bible, who started taking this combination therapy, and then all of a sudden they essentially rose from the dead, which is very heartwarming and inspiring until you think about all of the people who died just before that happened.
Right. Or like months even prior. Like it was, a huge shift.
Yeah. And then moving forward, combination therapy has been tweaked over the years. It was...
but what was introduced in 1995 worked. And continued to work.
Absolutely. Worked and continued to work. And it's just been tweaked a little bit to be a bit less harsh, give people more options. And then we had the advent of PrEP, which I think was approved in the US in 2012, which is a medication that a person can take. It's a prophylaxis, it's pre-exposure prophylaxis. It can prevent a person from acquiring HIV. When it was first introduced, it was a once daily pill. So you take it every day and then you can go out and have sex and you have very low risk for...
Low risk even without condom?
Even without condom, low risk, essentially no risk if you're taking it properly.
There's a shot now, or they're working on a shot, which is very cool for people that struggle with daily tasks.
Yeah, so it's changed now. You can still take the pill, the once daily pill. You can also get a shot now in Quebec.
Like you can go. It's live.
It's live in certain places. Quebec, it was just recently introduced. You get it once every 2 months, but I believe they're also working on a shot that's maybe once every 6 months. Yeah, there's also antiretroviral therapy that now you can receive. I believe it's once every 6 months.
And is that for somebody that is HIV positive?
For HIV positive.
Okay.
So prevention, we have PrEP. So you can take your PrEP. It prevents you from getting it. You can also use condoms. You can engage in any of the activities that Michael Callan and Richard Berkowitz described in their pamphlet 40 years ago. And that will help you prevent not just HIV, but other STIs as well, because there are other STIs out there. And then for people who are living with HIV, there are very effective treatments. And all the medical research at this point proves that if a person is taking their treatment and has an undetectable viral load, that person has zero risk of transmitting the virus to another person.
Zero.
Yeah, absolutely zero risk.
Holy shit.
Yeah, zero risk. So if you're taking your drugs and your viral load's undetectable, you can go out there and have sex without any risk of transmission.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now you can also take PrEP, or some people take PrEP. I heard you talking about it in the episode. It was like the 2-1-1 thing, like prior to a sexual encounter. And that's probably not as effective as daily, but
Well, it's still supposedly just as effective. What I will say is, like, I'm not a medical professional,
Yeah.
so I cannot give people medical advice. But I do my prep. I do the 2-on-1 because I typically go through phases with how slutty I am, and I'll have like 2 or 3 weeks where I don't have any sex, then I'll be like, now's the time. And so
and
for
does that mean you're taking it every day for those few weeks?
Yeah. So you take it for what I do is I take 2 pills. Has to be at least 2 hours. From 2 to 24 hours before I have sex.
Gotcha.
And then you take 1 pill every day after that until at least 48 hours has elapsed since.
So you could just keep the 1 day going.
Well, that's what I'm doing here in New York. I started my 2-on-1 this morning. Took my 2 pills 5 hours ago.
Yeah.
So I'm ready.
Now, are there side effects of PrEP?
Oh, absolutely. There can be side effects for PrEP. If you're taking PrEP, you have to be regularly monitored by a medical professional. You usually go in, you do your blood work. They check particularly kidney function because it can be a little harsh on the kidneys. As some people experience stomach issues. If I take my two pills on an empty stomach, my stomach will sometimes get a little wormy. Don't love that. But generally pretty safe and effective as long as you're being monitored by a medical professional throughout it. And
how do you see men who have sex with men having conversations now in 2025? Like, let's say it's on a dating app or hookup app. Like, how are people talking about HIV and PrEP and that kind of thing?
I haven't seen much of people using the word clean lately, which is nice.
Progress.
A lot of people will just say, are you on PrEP? And then no more questions asked.
And most times both participants
are. Most times both participants are. It is interesting that most sexual participants, look at me going out tonight. I'm looking for a participant.
Hey, talk nerdy to me.
Hell yeah. One interesting consequence is that there have been rises in other STIs because a lot of people are just going out there and having unprotected sex.
Right. Because the fear for men having sex with men is HIV. It's
for a lot of people. And it makes sense because of the history of the virus and because of the medical intervention that's required. It's typically a greater, it's going to take more of your resources to treat HIV than another infection.
For sure.
But that doesn't mean that there aren't other infections that can impact a person.
There are a lot. I've learned a lot about them in the last year. And in America, it can be like a fucking process to get tested and treated, which is what I'm working on. So it's like, it's there's still definitely risk with not using condoms for sure.
Yeah, and we need someone to invent some sort of app where people can get their testing done easily and access the results quickly.
That is the goal.
Yeah,
I also hope to expand into PrEP, birth control, emergency contraception. Like there's just, I don't know where our country is at right now. I think there's a lot of room for quick virtual access to sexual health. And like what I've been learning about is that with sexual health, you don't want to try to change people's sexual behavior. Like that's a huge undertaking and could take decades. You want to understand the behavior. So like something that I'm looking at is like, as much as I would love people to all be sex positive and want to hop on with a sex positive provider and have a chat and understand what they need to get tested for and do, people don't want to talk to a doctor about this shit. Usually they want a quick order. They want to submit a form. They don't want FaceTime, especially if they're afraid they are positive for an STI. They want to get the blood work done and they want to get an antibiotic sent to their pharmacy. So like the behavior that I've seen in my research is just like, as much as I would like for it to be progressive, I got to meet people where they're at, which is kind of discretion. And I don't want to say secrecy, but it is often just wanting to get it done when it comes to testing.
And discretion makes sense in a lot of, there are certain communities where there's still a lot of judgment, a lot of stigma. And so for some people, it's a safety thing. They want to keep that private. So it's no judgment towards those people, but discretion and then ease, there's companies in Canada that offer PrEP digitally. And I understand that, having gone through this whole ordeal with my doctor where I had to really advocate for myself to say, I need this prescription.
Let me educate you about this thing.
The other thing that I think we should mention is DoxyPEP, which is
yes.
available now that you can take as a post-exposure prophylactics. If you have
For HIV as well?
Not for
Or
HIV.
for
I mean,
STIs?
HIV PEP does exist for HIV. It's existed for a long time.
Okay.
If you are exposed to HIV, you think you are exposed to HIV, you can do PEP, post-exposure.
Okay, but that is separate from DoxyPEP.
Separate from DoxyPEP.
Gotcha.
Yeah, DoxyPEP is for other STIs, and if you are concerned about...
I'm seeing it being promoted by other companies. I won't say competitors yet, but other companies as like the morning after pill for STIs. My understanding is that it's like 1 to 2 doses. I can't remember of, I can't think of the antibiotic, but it's basically like you're like dosing an antibiotic.
Yeah, like a sort of like penicillin kind of thing.
Yeah.
But my knowledge of DoxyPEP is very limited. I have a meeting with my doctor in a couple weeks to talk about DoxyPEP.
I'm very curious about it as well. I've definitely heard about it. I will say that most straight folks have never fucking heard about it, but I think they could benefit from it tremendously if it was kind of marketed as the morning after STI pill. Like, I just feel like there's something that they could understand what it's for.
Yeah.
Like it's like a higher risk sexual encounter. You take it and it's,
Well, and like you said, it's about meeting people where they're at, right? Like what do straight people understand?
Oh yeah. Not as much about sexual health as others, but we're working on it. Well, I really appreciate this conversation and all of the work you're doing. I do wish we had more time to jump into some of your specific stories. I guess to wrap it up, what are you excited about for your work next week? The most excited about?
Well, I'm here researching Michael Callan, looking through his personal archive of videos, working on a documentary film about him. So hoping we can get some funding for that, get that off the ground. And then there is a 3rd season of Resurrection that is going to be coming out probably in November, December of this year. So maybe it will be out already when people are listening to this.
Great.
And people can go check that out. It's a very personal story, the 3rd season. So you can listen to all of my family dynamics in that one.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
It's great. What's the handle for that on social?
So you can find Resurrection on all your podcast platforms just by looking up Resurrection. On Instagram, it's resurrection.pod. And you can find me on Instagram at Dane.
Oh, that's right.
5 Danes.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. I appreciate you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks. Thanks so much for tuning in today. Don't forget to follow us on Spotify, Apple, and or YouTube, as well as on Instagram at Seggs Talk Radio. That's Seggs, Seggs. And before you go, head over to testy.co to join the waitlist for our 2026 launch. We are reinventing same-day walk-in STI testing nationwide.